Hello and welcome to Rogue Artisans and Crafters, two-time winner of the Southern Oregon Television Awards for Best Arts and Culture Show. I'm your host, Glamour Dave Nienow, and we welcome you, our viewer, to the beginning of our third season of shows for 2020, where we feature local artists and craftspeople here in Southern Oregon, and we talk to our featured artists about how they came to their art, what drives them as artists, find out stories behind their art process, and how their work as artists influences their lives. Today, I had the privilege of featuring local artisan Dan Elster's wonderful work in wildlife photography. And much of that wildlife photography is shot right here in our own region. And I've been wanting Dan to be a guest on the show since the show's beginning, and today it is finally happening. So today I'm pleased to have Dan Elster on the show and be able to talk to Dan about his life as an artist and the work that he pursues today with his wildlife photography. And so we welcome Dan to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to do it because I'm a big fan of your wildlife photography. So.
Well, thank you. I've been at it a while now, so you know that already.
Yeah, so how long have you been doing your work in wildlife photography, and what brought you into doing the work that you do?
Well, I grew up in a big city. I grew up in Chicago. So I always had a fascination with wildlife and animals and whatnot, but I really wasn't exposed to a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I would say in the early 2000s, I moved out of the city into kind of, I would describe as maybe a far suburb.
Yeah.
And started seeing like wild animals actually in the wild, not in a book, not on a television screen.
Yeah, right.
And it kind of set something off in me. And my then girlfriend, now wife, bought me a camera as a gift. And the camera sat in a box for probably 6 months. I was afraid to touch it. It looked so fancy, and I had no experience with cameras or anything like that. But finally one day at her urging, I took it out and went for a walk, and I swear that everything just changed that day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was like I was meant to do it.
Well, you definitely have developed a wonderful skill at it. And, you know, for where you were in Chicago, you know, for me, it's like I've always lived here my whole life here in the Ruhr Valley. So for me, it's like, you know, seeing the wildlife around is just like, it's just part of living here, right? And so for someone living in like New York or Chicago, it's got to be a different thing, not really having that exposure until you get out further. So I can see where that exposure, you know, kind of sets things off, right? And,
no question about it. You know, to this day, I'm still grateful every day I wake up in Southern Oregon. There's so much cool wildlife around here. I don't feel deprived that I haven't traveled the world to do wildlife photography or anything. Like there's
so much around here.
Yeah, there's so much more work to be done for me.
So at what point, what brought you to Southern Oregon from Chicago?
Well, the shorter version of the story is I was in Chicago working with my brother. We had a family business called Elster Foods.
Okay.
And it was a food distribution company on the west side of Chicago. It was very successful, but the longer I did it, the more it drained me. I just, it wasn't what I was meant to be doing.
Right.
So I quit my job, I sold my house, and my wife and I hit the road. She was a nurse, so she got a job as a travel nurse, and we started getting different contracts in different states. And I just really tried to hone in on my photography skills and learning about wild animals on a whole new level. And I remember sitting on a beach in Florida when my wife Patty, let's call her Patty, got a job offer on her cell phone for a job in Medford, Oregon.
Okay.
And we knew nothing about Medford, Oregon. We didn't know where it was. I had never heard of it. But we just, in that moment, decided, let's go for it.
Yeah.
And the rest is almost history. She got a 4-month contract out here, and I had a lot of luck with the camera and a little luck selling my work here. And we pretty much never left. We left briefly to gather our stuff and hightailed it back here. And now we've put down roots. That was, 13 or 14 years ago now.
Right, yeah. I'm always interested and fascinated by the circumstances that bring people from far away and bring them into our area, you know, and for them to settle in our area.
Sure.
You know, so now what camera gear do you use in shooting your wildlife?
Up till very recently, I've used Canon cameras, Canon gear.
Yeah.
Fairly modest. I use a 400 millimeter lens, which is not huge by wildlife standards.
Right.
It's certainly no cell phone. It's pretty capable.
Yeah.
But typically, I gotta get a little closer to my subject matter than maybe some wildlife photographers out there.
Yeah, because most of the other pro wildlife photographers that I am aware of, like Thomas Mangelson and some others, I mean, they got the 500, 600, 800 millimeter
Yeah,
massive
it's true.
Canon lenses, and they're like out in Alaskan tundra and they're shooting something that's like, half a mile down the way, with their big lenses.
Very true. That being said, I've recently switched to Sony, and now I'm the proud owner of a 600 millimeter lens. So it's going to open up some new doors for me, probably.
Yeah.
But I think, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, really, because I've been a Canon shooter myself for the last 20 years, but Canon in recent years really has come on super strong in the digital camera market. They've been really innovative in some of their DSLR technology, and they've just finally begun to kind of expand out on their lens collection, and so that's been really great to see. And down the road, when I'm in a financial situation, I could actually consider myself switching over to Sony, because they have been developing some really wonderful technology to kind of make that photography process easier.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that being said, I get asked a lot about my equipment and whatnot, and I sometimes think there's too much emphasis on gadgets and having the latest, greatest of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have good gear, but I
Yeah.
think some people believe the bigger the lens and the more megapixels, the better the photography is going to be. And
No, because it really, the equipment is just your toolkit,
right,
right?
exactly.
You still have to have that vision, that eye for the scene, and you have to know how to master the use of that equipment. And, so it's just not all in the equipment itself. You've got to have mastery of the tool, and you've got to have that vision of what it is that you're trying to capture.
Exactly. Composition, light.
That's right.
Understanding your subject matter.
Yeah. And in the case of wildlife photography, you kind of have to, I would imagine you have to gain an understanding of the behaviors of certain animals that you're kind of capturing commonly, right?
Absolutely. It even comes down to individuals, like reading body language and things like that, knowing when you are making an animal uncomfortable,
Yes.
things like that. But, from a broader sense of view, too, like I understand that approaching raptors on foot usually doesn't work. Using a vehicle or a blind is much more effective.
Yeah.
It's always different, and I'm always learning. It's one of my favorite parts about what I do is studying my subjects. Wild animals are much more interesting to me than Photoshop techniques and the latest gear and stuff like that. I just love the subject matter so much that that's what drives me.
Yeah, well, and you do a really wonderful job of capturing that action by the animals. You're capturing their action in their natural environment, and it's just like your this is a hawk here.
This is a red-tailed hawk.
Red-tailed hawk. It's just I can't imagine how far away you had to be to get that moment, and just being able to get it is just an amazing sight to see. So how far away were you from, like, in that circumstance?
Well, that was the beauty of this individual bird. It let me get closer than any red-tailed hawk I had ever known up to that point.
Yeah.
That's at Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge,
Yeah,
which is it's a series of gravel roads.
Yeah.
Most of the photography is done from your vehicle there.
Yeah.
The vehicle serves as a great blind.
Yeah.
And after a couple days there, I realized that this hawk had little or no fear of me getting as close as I'd like, as long as I stayed in my vehicle.
Yeah.
So after a couple days, I'm like, this is a very unusual photo opportunity. And I also know that halfway across the refuge, there's probably 30 photographers all surrounding a bald eagle nest, which is the more glamorous subject,
Yeah.
whatever. But this guy just gave me, he gave me a lot of unique looks. In this particular image, he's just scratching his or her face, and I caught the nictating membrane,
Yeah.
and that's why the eye looks kind of otherworldly
yeah,
there,
right,
which
yeah.
adds kind of a sinister element to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like the slightly unusual look of that
Yeah.
particular image. So, your basic question was, I almost could have patted that bird on the head. That's how
Wow.
close I got,
Wow.
without it being upset or disturbed in the least.
Yeah, that's got like fall in the category of like amazing, unique life circumstances that is part of your work, right? It's part of your life art experience.
It all boils down to that.
Yeah.
I love the subject matter so much that it's a privileged feeling.
Yeah.
All of my images, they all have some sort of story behind them, some more than others, but
Yeah.
it's a moving experience to me. It's I can't imagine
Yeah.
wanting or doing
And
anything
at
else.
this point, you're doing this pretty much full time.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's an amazing achievement right there as an artist, being able to do what you love artistically and be able to do it full time and making a living out of it.
Yeah, when I first started, there was a kind of like fat chance that's ever going to work, but I had a supportive wife and ambition.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at this point, we have some more images of your work in a slideshow. And so this would be a good time for the control room to bring up those images. We'll start talking about some of these stories behind these images.
Sure. This first image here, this is a coyote over in the Klamath Basin. This particular coyote was interesting in that when I finally decided to approach it on foot, which typically doesn't work over there, they're hunted over there, they're generally pretty skittish. I pursued this one on foot for probably a couple hundred yards when it turned back toward me and started trotting back toward me. And I got some great images, that one included, but then I decided it was time to turn around too. I don't think it was being aggressive, but it was being curious. And they are absolutely one of my favorite animals. They are just maligned and treated very cruelly in a lot of different ways, and I would love to raise awareness about their importance in the ecosystem.
They have a really important role in the ecosystem. And I've read of some of the impact studies that have been done on the role of coyotes in some of the national parks before they were eradicated and then after they were reintroduced.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a dramatic positive benefit having them in the system.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's a good thing to explore. So, now what we got here?
This is always one of my favorite things to do in the summer. This is an osprey near Gold Beach, right at the mouth of the Rogue River. Every summer, beginning probably mid-August into September, you can look up in the air at any given time and probably see 25 or 30 osprey all hunting. And it makes for a great day to, kick your shoes off, stand in the surf, and just try and focus in on the action. And this particular bird did everything right. It came very close, it flew straight, and it was in perfect light. I have tons of images with osprey with fishing their talons, but this is probably my favorite of all time.
Yeah, all right.
This is a northern Pacific rattlesnake. I accompanied a friend / biologist up in Washington who's doing rattlesnake surveys for his thesis or something for college. Right. And so we visited 3 different dens, rattlesnake dens, which extremely high concentrations of rattlesnakes.
Oh, wow.
And this particular one, I'm laying in the grass and trying to get a, kind of a face-on view. I didn't know that the tongue would match the color of that flower so perfectly. And looking back, maybe it was kind of foolish. If you get hit by a rattlesnake in the face, you're probably in trouble. But,
well, just the idea of just deliberately choosing to go into a rattlesnake den area is like like, okay, well, that might be exciting for someone, but not me.
I think I have an affinity for animals that other people don't like.
Yeah?
Ravens,
Yeah.
coyotes, rattlesnakes. This is a pair of northern flickers. Actually, I shouldn't say a pair. This is two males who are both trying to impress the same female, who you can't see, who's just out of view.
Okay.
But I was exhausted just watching them. They were dancing, they were fighting, it just went on and on and on, and eventually they just stopped, and that's what you see there. They just stopped, and they disappeared. I never know who won her affection. I couldn't follow them any longer. But yeah, this is a couple river otters over in the Klamath area. I was actually just photographing the one on the right, and it was almost like a photobomb situation. That one who's laying down there slid in as I was focused on the one on the right. It's a very memorable moment. River otters are one of my favorites. This is a mama and one of her two cub black bears. This is an image that was the result of a tip. Actually, our pediatrician's property, and I get a phone call one day like, we just saw them, they just went over this ridge, yada yada, and I hightailed it over there, and it was actually a pretty close encounter, probably closer than I'd like. It was hairy for a brief time. It was a very brief photo shoot. And lots of the images were blurry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can imagine.
Here's a fledgling northern spotted owl. This is from this past summer. I am fortunate to know several wildlife biologists in Southern Oregon, and I will go out and do owl surveys with them. A lot of people already know this species is in a lot of trouble. There's a long history with logging operations, and there's just, to me, they're an icon of the Pacific Northwest. I remember reading about them in Chicago, and now that I'm seeing them on the front lines in Southern Oregon for myself is really an amazing thing.
All right, let's go on to the next.
Here is a bobcat photographed right off of North Phoenix Road. This is another situation that started with a tip. It was kind of a friend on several hundred acres in this beautiful oak savanna habitat. And they asked if I'd have any interest in trying to pursue bobcats. There's a whole family of them. There's just these sporadic sightings, and it turned into like a very exciting summer. I got a few of kittens. This I believe was the mother. I don't know. But that's certainly as close as I've ever been to a wild bobcat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an amazing image.
This is a Roosevelt elk down at Prairie Creek Redwoods. I had been there, I was with another photographer, and we kind of embedded ourselves with this herd of elk for a couple days. And this you'd call one of the satellite bulls. He's not the main bull who's got all the females, but he's a big, strong bull. And he was hanging out with some other younger bulls, and for some reason he just left the herd, and he just walked down in the water, and he stood there. It's a very moving moment for me. I'll never quite understand what it was thinking or what it was doing, but
well, and it's an amazing image in that one. I've never thought, for example, that you would ever expect to see that kind of a scene, right? I mean, seeing an animal like that on like a beach style setting, right? With it's
two worlds colliding.
Yeah,
really.
It really is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next.
These are Tundra Swans over in the Klamath area. I am generally out before sunrise.
Okay. All right, so let's go on to the next.
These are RedWinged Blackbirds. This is a flock of RedWinged Blackbirds over, again, in the Klamath area. It seems to grow every year. There are thousands upon thousands of them, and in the winter they seem to form these huge flocks, and they feed together.
Yeah.
And they create these murmurations and really cool stuff. These are snow geese passing a moon, obviously. That is another pre-dawn shot. I set up a camera and a tripod and hope there's so many geese in the air over there at a certain time of year. I just needed some to pass away farther enough where they'd be in focus.
Right, yeah.
And finally this flock did. That's one of my favorite images. in the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really cool, unique moon image, you know. I'm just amazed that you're able to capture that kind of a scene. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's cool. So let's go on to the next.
This is right in Lithia Park. A lot of people are surprised
Really?
to hear that. I was actually in my booth at the Lithia Artisans Market when
Yeah.
someone came into my booth and said, you know, there's a mama bear and a cub up in the park. And I kind of haphazardly walked up in there to see what was going on, and there's 5 or 6 people underneath this tree. And I look up there, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So I abandoned my booth, I ran to my car, I drove home, grabbed my gear, drove back into the park, ran back, you know, and then it set off. I got to photograph this mom and two cubs for a couple days.
Yeah.
And yeah, really exciting. And you know, once there was no other people around, it was just me and the bears. I got some really cool images. That being one of them.
Cool. All right, let's go on to the next.
This is a bald eagle and a young red-tailed hawk just hanging out. I've been photographing raptors for 15 years.
Yeah.
I've never seen that.
Yeah.
And I think I get asked once a weekend if that's photoshopped.
Yeah, because they just
Because
don't-
it just typically doesn't happen like that. I
Yeah.
think in some areas when there's enough prey,
Yeah.
there's not this intense competition,
Right.
and that's probably what you're seeing
Yeah.
there.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next. This
This is your favorite image?
This was my favorite image. This has been my favorite image of yours for years.
This is one of my best-selling images ever. I was just on my way home from Upper Klamath Lake, 2 lousy days of photography. I get 10 minutes from home, and off on the side of the road is this barn owl just sitting there.
Yeah.
It didn't look real. I eventually approached it on foot, and I think when I finally got too close, it's almost like
Yeah.
flexing its muscles there
Yeah,
and telling
right.
me to back off,
Yeah.
which is what I did.
Yeah. Well, we're down to like the last 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, let's talk a bit about what is like the price range of your art in terms of, because I know you have various products, including
Sure.
including a new book that of your work that's
I have a self-published book out now that was paid for in part with a grant. Very proud of the book. The book is $39.95,
Yeah.
but I do anything from a $4 greeting card up to a $500 signed, frame, numbered photograph,
Right.
and everything in between,
okay.
different sizes.
Right.
And,
And we also have you have a calendar.
I put out a calendar every year.
That's right.
The
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah. Okay. And so now, how do people get a hold of you to want to purchase your art?
My website would be the first, elsterphotography.com.
Yeah.
You can find me on Facebook at Elster Photography, Instagram. And then locally, like you can find my book in Paddington Station, Northwest Nature Shop, the Ashland Art Center,
Yeah.
the Lithia Artisans Market. It's hard to avoid me locally.
Well,
I'm a shameless promoter of what I do.
yeah. Well, that's a good thing. So now, in terms of the size of your prints,
Sure.
what's the smallest to the largest that you do?
I do little 11 by 14 matted
Okay,
prints. They're $45.
Right.
This here is a 20 by 30 print, and I even go bigger with that, depending on, usually with my more recent images, which have bigger, higher resolution and
Yeah.
whatnot, I'm going bigger
Yeah.
and bolder.
Right.
But I could be, flexible. I want people to enjoy my artwork, and that's a nice thing about photography is you can
Yeah.
reproduce it in
That's
lots
right.
of different sizes, for sure.
Okay. So like 11 by 14s are like you say like $45.
Yep.
And then you go to like, I suppose you got like 16 by 20.
I got a 16 by 20, which is $85.
Okay.
I could frame one for $165.
Right.
These are kind of my signature pieces. These are editioned in the big size.
Yeah.
These are $395 frame like that.
Oh, okay.
So I try and be affordable. I have
Yeah.
to make a living, but
That's right,
I don't
yeah.
have to be
But, yeah.
extreme in my pricing.
Yeah. So it's really good to see that you've got really reasonable pricing, and the quality of your imagery is just absolutely outstanding, which is why I've been a fan for several years. So
I appreciate
So
that.
I'm really happy to finally have you come on the show and to give you this showcase because it's a wonderful talent that you have, and so thank you very
My
much.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty, well, we've reached the end of our show, Rogue Artisans and Crafters, and we thank you at home for joining us and learning about our featured artist, Dan Elster, and we wish to thank Dan Elster for agreeing to come on to the show to discuss his life as an artist. So I'm your host, David Glamour Dave Nienow, and we will see you next time, Rogue Valley. And then let control room break. Thank you for watching Rogue Artisans and Crafters. You can watch the show on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. and Thursday evenings at 11:30 p.m. on Channel 15 in Ashland and via charter cable on Channel 182. You can watch the show on demand at rvtv.sou.edu by searching for Rogue Artisans and Crafters. You can follow our show on Facebook by visiting and liking our show page. Just search for Rogue Artisans and Crafters. You can follow David Glamour Dave Nienow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search for Glamour Dave. If you like this show and wish to support David Glamour Dave Nienow and his show productions, you can visit his Patreon page at patreon.com/glamourdave to become a patron supporter. We want to thank our crew who have made it possible to put this program together, and to thank RVTV for their wonderful studio facility that allows us to produce shows such as this one. If you'd like to become a studio producer and create your own public access show, you can contact RVTV to learn how by calling 541-552.